God, thank you so much for giving us this time together, and bless us as we explore your word. Remember those who are traveling, give them blessings. Those who are ailing, give them comfort, or give them support and wisdom to those who are treating them. And for those who have lost loved ones, give them comfort. We ask this in the name of Christ. Amen. Okay, we're talking about 1 Corinthians. And
I'm sorry.
No, I just, when an old teacher, when you look around and all of a sudden you see people fumble around and then stare at you, then something's going on.
I remember it's wrong to talk in class.
Well, it was just something's going on, because so seldom do they actually look at you. Because anytime you ask a question, they're looking someplace else. So,
let me think about it.
Yeah, kids, they're funny. Because if they stared at you, you're not going to call on them. If they're staring at you, you might be creeped out, but you're not going to call on them. But, it's when they're kind of looking around that, that's like blood in the water. Okay, so we're looking for 1 Corinthians. Paul wrote it. Church in Corinth. Church in Corinth is kind of a mess. And we start seeing it in the letters. What seems to be what precipitates this letter? What is it that is written Paul's motivation, based on what we have talked about earlier, in writing this particular letter to this particular congregation?
Immorality.
Okay, well, immorality is there, right? Even before that, before we start. Okay, you got a church that's racked with divisions, right? And the divisions seem to be centered around Paul and Apollos. And mentions Cephas, and it mentions, and that's Peter, mentions Jesus. So you've got a church that's falling into divisions, which isn't surprising because you look at the Corinthian community and they are divided anyway for a lot of reasons. Port town, got a lot of cultures working together, a lot of religions. We're going to find out later in the church there's a discrepancy of wealth. You've got real wealthy people and people that aren't real wealthy. So you've got a lot of reasons why this church could be divided. Paul starts by talking about this division between his followers and Apollos' followers. Understand the guys following Cephas were probably what are called Judaizers, Christians that wanted to follow the Jewish law. If you want to know more about that, read the first couple of chapters of Galatians, because that's the big Galatian problem, is you've got people that are saying, if you want to be a Christian, that's great, but if you want to be even a better Christian, you got to follow the Jewish law, which is not, that's kind of what some people do, overachievers do, Okay, so we've got the division. Now, what does he say? How does he respond to the divisions right up front? How does he respond to this break he sees in the church? What does he say about his work?
It's foolishness.
Okay, it's foolishness.
It's not really a problem if they pay attention to what they're supposed to do.
Okay, if they're paying attention to what they're supposed to do, and he even talks about what he did and what Apollos did, because that seems to be the big division. Makes sense. This is in Greece. Corinth is in Greece, really influenced by Greek philosophy. So you've got the Apollos, the eloquent, the wisdom, using all the right language. Paul a little different. What does he say about the approach? What does he say about the work that the two are doing? How does he compare the work that he did versus Apollos? Yeah. Okay, we got that building metaphor. He laid the foundation. Apollos built the walls. Used an agricultural image, right? For those who aren't into buildings. What did Paul do? Planted. And what did Apollos do? Water. Okay, so each of them had different jobs. And to say one job is better is kind of ridiculous, because if you're going to have a building, you got to have both walls and foundations. You're going to have crops. You got to plant seeds, but you also got to nurture them. So both of them were important, although for Paul, as he does this, and this is kind of typical Paul, because remember, a real human being is writing this. This isn't a guy in a trance doing something. Real human being. When you look at the relative jobs, planting versus watering, laying the foundation versus building the walls, what does Paul, which would seem to be, even though he won't directly say, would seem to be the more important job?
His job.
Yeah, laying the foundation. And in fact, never even mentions the walls are going to be judged based on the quality and there'll be fire. But he never says the foundation is going to be judged, because the foundation he laid is Jesus Christ, right? And when you think about agriculture, planting seeds and watering, both very important, right?
You can water all you want, but if you
But
don't have a seed in there,
that's exactly right. If somebody hadn't planted a seed, water means nothing.
you'll get well-watered weeds.
You'll get well-watered weeds or dirt.
Sometimes, don't you think, though, that in general, people think of what's visible. You don't see the seed.
Sure.
You don't see the foundation.
And how might that be? That's really good. How might that be related to the relative qualities of the two people? Because what does Paul say as he laid the foundation or as he planted the seed? How did he go about doing it?
You don't have a firm foundation. You don't have
Right, if you got to have it firm. So if the foundation is Jesus, that's where he was focused, right? And when we presented Jesus to the Corinthians, how did he do it? Did he use...
Oh, no, he was not eloquent.
He was not eloquent. He was basic. Why was it so important that he be basic?
Understand?
Because they got to understand it. If he was really... I worked under a minister. He's I want to say good guy. He was awful. But down in New Orleans, he's dead. But he was awful. And in fact, I spent years when I looked to move to make sure, because he wanted to be a Presbyterian exec. He didn't like being in the church. He wanted to be an executive. And I would always check to make sure he wasn't in the place where I would want to go. Because I didn't want him to be advising. He was an interesting guy. He would never, if he were talking, like we're talking one night, he would talk like this. How are things going? And it was really different, because he'd never look at you in the eye. He'd talk to you like this. But he'd never look at you. And boy, that makes you
Seemed like he didn't really care.
well, it was just kind of creepy. And he was kind of an Apollos guy, because he'd preach sermons, and I can remember people saying he had a habit of copying commentaries. I remember him writing sermons with his typewriter. Of course, this was typewriter, not computer, but typewriter, and he'd have the commentary here, and he'd be typing like that. And so the sermons were very academic, and people would leave saying, "Oh, isn't he wonderful? What an impressive sermon." And so you'd hear somebody else, I didn't understand it. Well, I didn't either, but boy, it wasn't beautiful. He was an English major in college. He told me he went to seminary in the 60s because he didn't want to be drafted. It was not a good look. But it was he was very eloquent. But if you're going to lay a foundation, you don't want to be too eloquent. You want to be pretty basic, right? Because if people are confused, you're not really helping them.
But it's interesting to me, I think it's in Acts, when he's before king or governor, I can't remember which, the response to his eloquent defense is, Paul, I think you've gone mad because of your much learning. So he had that other side that he could
turn it on,
yeah,
if he wanted to. I think Paul's very educated. But that's not the way he wants to present himself to the Corinthians. And clearly the opposition is, or the people who are not in Paul's camp are saying, we should listen to Apollos because, wow, is that ever beautiful? just listen to him. And he may have been a good speaker. There's indication Paul was not a particularly good speaker. He didn't make a great appearance. He wasn't a dashing guy. Paul may have had some real hindrances to it in terms of presentation. So he's saying, but what I gave you is very basic, and what Apollos did was sort of build on that basis. Okay, so we've got that different. Once he sort of establishes this, and he's going to come back to it in chapter 12, this different jobs, then he starts talking about issues that he's heard about. When we move from chapter 4 to chapter 5, he starts looking at different issues. And the first issue is something that was reported to him, right? We have a little problem in the Corinthian church. And what is the little problem in the Corinthian church?
The guy is sleeping with his mother-in-law.
A guy has shacked up, only it sounds better when you say it in Greek, shacked up with his, his father's wife, his stepmother. And I don't understand. And evidently, whatever's going on, it's a pretty big deal. Because it would appear as though the guy doing it is doing what? Seems to be breaking the law. And that's why Paul says, this is a situation he really comes down hard on and says what to him?
Throw him out.
You got to throw him out. And not only throw him out, you should be throwing him in prison. Throw him out right into the arms of the police. Because you can't have this guy doing this sort of stuff. Now, as soon as he says this, it's giving you a bad reputation, right? People are talking about how sleazy y'all are. How sleazy y'all are. You don't want that, right? Now, again, remember I said Paul is a plotter, and he is. Because he introduces this idea, throw him, you got to get rid of him. Let the Romans deal with him. He's going to have to. And evidently it was a big crowd. So what exactly is going on in this situation? Don't know. But it must be a big deal because he sort of suggests what? When you turn him over to the Romans, they're going to kill him. This is a capital crime. So it's a big deal for the Romans. You can't have your church sort of sullied with this kind of reputation. Well, how does he build on that? Because Paul doesn't just drop these things in and then move to something else. How does he? What does he say that sort of surrounds this business about this guy, getting rid of this guy?
Their arrogance.
Yes. This is the reason you're doing it. You're being arrogant. Why are they being arrogant? Why letting him stay when everybody knows this is against the law? Everybody knows. Why would letting him stay show arrogance on your part?
They're lawbreakers.
Yeah, they're not following the law themselves.
Not following the law, they're lawbreakers themselves. What are they doing that Paul sees as a really big problem here?
Breaking God's law.
They're breaking God's law, which means they're claiming...
They're setting themselves up as God.
Exactly. Claiming God's authority. Authority is a big issue. We're going to see authority mentioned again this week that he pulls on, because it's going to be kind of a theme in 1 Corinthians. But they're claiming authority, that they have the right to do what?
Whatever they want.
Whatever they want. They can spin God's word any way they want. And that's fine. Now, that's all well and good, right? But again, Paul's a plotter. So now he's concerned. He says, so give them over to the Romans. You have no business claiming authority that doesn't belong to you. Now somebody's going to raise their hand, like our brother John did last week. And will raise their hand and say, oh, that means the Romans are the authority, right? And so if we have a problem in the church, we should do what? Go to the Romans, right? Because this guy is in our church, right? And Paul doesn't say, deal with this issue on your own. No, he's violating the law. This is a big deal. You can't have him around. Turn him over to the police. Well, how is that different than
What's the difference between
the chicken fence, the chickens on the, your side of the fence, on your property?
criminal activity versus?
I think he doesn't use those terms, but I think that's the case because he talks about, again, we're dealing with authority. Where does the church and the Romans have authority? Well, in this criminal case, turn him over because you got no right to keep him in your church. You're damaging your church. But if there's a dispute between Christians in this community, maybe what? Maybe you should work it out yourself within this community and not do what? Go to the Roman court. Now, this is suing within the church. Now, there's a lot of practical reason why that's a bad idea to sue within the church. Because you cannot end up united if you're suing one another. You kind of setting yourself up for disunity, right? So that's a problem. But he takes it further. This isn't just a practical issue. This is a theological issue. What's the theology around you got to solve problems on the inside? Yeah. This Roman judge could care less about God, right? Certainly he's not a Christian. You mean you're going to trust this guy who doesn't share your values to make decisions within the community? If you can't find an honest person in your community, a just person in your community, you are really screwed up. If that secular judge is better than anybody in here, you are really messed up. Inside the church can cause all kinds of problems, legal stuff. A church I worked in, in Indianapolis, the Indianapolis church, had an interim who got himself into some difficulty. Well, he was visiting a family. It's awful. He's visiting a family, and the family has a dog. As he's visiting this family, the dog rushes out and bites him. Not in the best place for a person to be bitten. Not a good situation. In fact, not unrelated to what we'll be talking about later. He ended up suing the person for his medical bills and pain and suffering. And that caused enormous problems. That it was done within. Now, I don't know what you do. I don't know what you do. But that's what he did, and he chose to do it. And it created some issues.
Can I share a
Yeah, please do. Unless it's involving some, especially
No,
with
it's
different.
not that kind of
Okay,
thing.
good.
My grandson fell at church during a game that they were playing in junior church and hit his head, and he hit it pretty hard, got a gash, and we took him to the ER. There was an EMT there, and he checked him out, but we all felt we should go to the ER and have it worked up. So that afternoon, when my daughter got home, she had a phone call from the church secretary saying, "We have insurance. We just need this information. We will take care of your medical bills." Now, to me, that's the appropriate way to handle it. They also don't play that game anymore. But But, to me, that is a good example
Yes.
of the appropriate way to handle it. It happened here, it happened during an activity we were sponsoring. We want to take care of the bills.
When you're talking about that, it happened at the church at the people's home.
It happened at the people's home. He was visiting. He was going
They
up
have
and stuff.
insurance, you know.
I don't.
It's an issue that's tough, and you shouldn't have, in a situation like, you shouldn't have to even bring it up.
Exactly. It should
Right.
be taken up.
You get we didn't even sue, but you get in a situation, Suzanne used to deliver newspapers.
Mm-hmm.
And on one of the blocks up on the hill, she was delivering a newspaper this day, and people's door was open and a screen door. And she could see a dog in there. And she didn't like the idea of a dog in there. So she put the paper on the porch. She turned to walk out, and it was a gated place. The dog came flying through the screen, right through the screen, and nailed her in her back. So we reported it and everything. The police went up and checked it out. So they were going to have somebody else sued. They were going to have a civil trial.
Mm-hmm.
Now you can't believe what you have to go through. We didn't go there for any money or anything. We just went to the trial to see what was going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
The lady at the house, who they subpoenaed,
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't come down to city court. So the city lawyer at the time said, well, nothing we can do. There are 10 people in there that dog had attacked.
Mm-hmm.
And they all got to the point, some of them multiple times, because they would walk, right? And they said, hey, go get her, arrest her.
Mm-hmm.
We can't arrest her. Why? Because she claims the dog is not hers. The dog's in her house. Doesn't matter. The dog is her husband's. Well, then get him. You can't, because he's living up in New Cumberland. I mean, you went through all this stuff and everything, and all people wanted was some justification. So they finally did get away that through the county dog warden, they could take the dog to where the dog wardens take the dog. But here's 10 people, some of them bit multiple times, and you can't do anything. The dog had more rights, actually, than any of the people there.
Well, I think
Now, if everybody there would have sued, they wouldn't have gotten any money, and that probably wouldn't matter, but that might have been the way to make sure that the dog didn't bite anybody else.
Well, I think the dog gets a right to be tried by a jury of his peers. They're talking about it. There is a psychologist guy that's pushing for animals Well,
to have the same rights as citizens.
Yeah.
Now, did you bite that kid?
case closed. Yeah, but see, that confession isn't allowable. Yeah, that's right. Putting his hand, little paws above his head. Well, I'll tell you, I don't believe that dogs should have the same rights as people. I see no reason why they should be dropped down to our level.
Oh.
You know?
Something else I can say. You see, I can't think where it is, and maybe some of you have seen it. This, they're going to ban it, want to ban it.
Oh, I haven't.
Because in what we're talking about, okay, homosexualism, lesbianism, and so forth, the Bible preaches against it, therefore they're biased.
Yeah.
And you have a biased document there, it should be banned.
Banned where?
In California.
California.
It's in
Well,
the legislature.
maybe. Did the whole state ever be burned? Maybe.
If that goes through, they won't be able to sell the Bible, give the
They
Bible.
don't know if it's passed or not.
Yeah,
if it's gonna pass or
Yeah,
not.
I'd have to, I need to read more about that, so I can, because that means 80% of literature written in the last 20 years would be banned.
Yeah,
In some way.
that's-
And so maybe it is, I'd have to read more.
From what I've read, that is the plan.
To ban all the literature written in the last
Well,
20 years?
anything that has a negative representation.
You're not allowed to have, it's called something about
I
bias.
want to read.
My God, you have to have.
Yeah, but that's something I'd have to I'd have to read. I mean, that's, yeah. Yeah.
You're not
Well, but
biased.
before, don't react, because you gotta read, I gotta read. I need to know. That just sounds like an internet thing. But could be true, could be very true.
it's on the news.
I've heard too many things about Sharia law, being instituted in Detroit, and it wasn't, but that was, but that's not what we're talking about. I'd have to make sure. That sounds sort of like a political thing. Okay, but I would definitely check on it. I remember a good friend of mine who was really sent me an email saying this, and I researched it, and it wasn't, Sharia law that they were, and it wasn't. He was mad. He was, how could we do this? And it wasn't. It wasn't. It didn't make sense to me because why? You couldn't get it through the legislature. You couldn't get it through anybody. You couldn't get it past the court. And so I checked on it, and it kind of sideways. I'll check on it. If only for myself. Okay, we're in chapter 7. Paul. So we've got these differences, right, that are within the Corinthian church, kind of splitting them up. Not unlike differences within the modern church, splitting us up. And if we look at a chapter, now he's starting to talk about issues that are uniquely Corinthian, right? Because he talked about what was reported. Now in chapter 7, he makes a shift, right? What does he say in chapter 7? How does he make the shift?
Now,
Okay, now and what? Where's he getting this
He's
information?
answering a question
Yes.
that Gretchen has
Okay,
out.
these are, the first one was, this was reported. This was reported to me. Now he's saying, you've asked me some questions. And so let me respond to what the question. And what is the first question? What's the first question they want answered?
It would appear that should a man be celibate?
man,
Okay, should a man, well, it becomes kind of interesting. Because, what were you going to say, Rick?
Oh, I was just saying, is it good for a man not to marry?
Yeah, well, I think it is more blunt than that. Should a man have sexual relationship with his wife? Should a man touch a woman? Now, why would this even be an issue? My gosh, why would this be an issue? And actually, I think it's an issue related to what he's already talked about.
It's because they're sidetracked.
Well, that's what he's going to say. Why would this be an issue that they're asking? In other words, is it better for a man and a woman not to have sexual relations? And evidently there are people that are saying, yeah, it's better. Why would this even be an issue? Why would they be bringing it to him?
Because they have,
Joy, and when you say it, direct it at Joy, because Joy is feeling really uncomfortable. So see if we get her to turn different colors. Why would
I was
he?
going to say the culture.
Okay, good. Tell me about the
He
culture.
had a temple with 1,000 prostitutes.
Okay, you got this very, you have a very open
Yeah.
culture. You also have, because the implication seems to be, that people aren't saying, yeah, men should touch on every woman they can. 4 or 5 would be better. It would seem as though there are people who are saying,
Don't touch.
don't touch. Don't touch. Even if you're married, don't touch. Now, why in heaven's name would anybody be saying that? I know.
Because he wants to be more dedicated.
Okay, that's what Paul is going to move into, because it's going to be a touchy thing. I'm talking about, why would anybody in that church say it is better for a man never to touch a woman, even if she's his wife?
Because Paul said he could be like him.
Could be. Rick is right about the culture. And this shows how divided the Corinthian church
If
is.
you're asking that question that way, then you have to assume that none of them are married.
This
Or
is
none of them are having sex with their wives.
this is the issue. And see, it's hard for us because we're not there. You know, we would assume that the culture is radically different. We can't identify with what they're saying, although we got bits and pieces of it now. They're divided community, right? In a very licentious town, wide open town. You're also talking about a time when Platonic and Neoplatonic philosophies very strong among intellectuals. Now, you know, when I say Plato, we're talking about a person, right? And Plato had a very definite, Greek philosopher, very definite idea about the spiritual world and the physical world. In fact, if you want to find out what Plato taught and how it related to Christianity, talk to a Christian scientist. Because a Christian scientist is following good Neoplatonic philosophy within Christianity. What the Platonists believed, what Plato believed, the Neoplatonists, the New Platonists, because Plato is long since gone, believed that you had a physical world and a spiritual world. And which world, and I'm just asking, which world is superior? The physical or the spiritual? The spiritual world is superior, right? In fact, Plato said it is the spiritual world that's real. The physical world is just a pale reflection of the spirit. The physical world is just a pale reflection of the spiritual world. In other words, kind of on a base level, that we all know what a chair looks like, right? If I show you, we've got a chair here, looking at this room, I see 4 different kinds of chairs, right? But if you looked at any of those 4, you would say they are chairs. They are chairs, right? And Plato says, see, we all have a sense. Adler's going to call it the archetype. We all have a sense of what it is what a chair looks like, right? Why do we have the sense of what a chair looks like? There must be a perfect image of chair. That all of these have the quality of chairness that enables us to understand that it's a chair, right? So there must be a perfect chair image somewhere that we are tapping into and just identifying these fragile reflections of this perfection. And this perfection exists in the spiritual world. Classic Platonic image. Guys chained in a cave, facing a wall. See, we become deceived that the image is the perfection. In other words, we convince ourselves that this is the chair, when in fact the perfect chair isn't physical at all. It's spiritual. And we deceive ourselves into trusting that which is lesser. Guys chained in a cave, looking at a wall, cannot turn their head, all they can see is a wall. People walking in front of the cave cast shadows on the wall, right? The people chained, who have never seen anything other than the shadows of the wall, begin to assume that those shadows are what? Reality. That the shadows aren't shadows of something else, but assume that the shadows are real themselves. And that's what Plato says, everything is shadow. Everything is a shadow. It is a pale reflection of what is true. Now, we see that reflected a little bit in the Bible. In one place in particular, probably the most Platonic book in the Bible, the letter to the Hebrews. Because it talks about Jesus being the perfect high priest. And he enters the perfect, sanctuary of God. And there's a perfect altar. And everything on earth is just reflections of that perfection. Man, that is Platonic philosophy. Now, if the spiritual is superior to the physical, right? The physical is just a bad reflection of what is true. Then the more spiritual you can become, the better you are, right? The better you are. So you aspire to the spiritual, right? Well, if you look at human nature and human action, sexuality is about as physical as you can get. So the plainness of saying, if you want a higher sense of love, what you need to do is what?
Abstain.
Get rid of this physical stuff. In fact, for the Greeks, for a lot of the Greeks, and this is why they called it Greek, homosexual love was superior than heterosexual. Why? Why would homosexual love actually be superior to heterosexual? That's one reason why homosexuality is so dangerous in ancient societies.
No reproduction.
You have no reproduction. So you're not creating more physical beings. Instead, you have reached a higher plane. Now, even higher would be no physical at all. But that's higher than this very base level where you're reproducing other physical inferior things. Now, that's good Neoplatonic philosophy. In a place that has temple prostitutes saying, hey, big boy, you want to worship later? You want to tithe? You got a place like that. In the same community, you got Neoplatonists saying, higher love is non-physical. You
So
aspire
then-
to the spiritual.
Do they not eat because
Well,
it's much more spiritual
yeah,
not
well, and if you abstain from food and pass on, the Neoplatonists believed that the human being there were two aspects of human beings. That we are a spirit within a shell. And when you die, what happens? The spirit is released from the shell. So you said better be it. A Platonist would say you bet. In fact, the sooner you can be released from that shell that you're carrying around, the better you are.
Why did they all go around and commit suicide?
A lot of them did. A lot of them did. Now, what they would say is that you're not, because you haven't reached that level. But the goal in life is to escape the physical world. Oh, there's a whole system of beliefs. A lot of sort of semi-Christians are writing this stuff about how, even the God of the Old Testament, no high God would create matter. Creation of matter is something that's bad. Why would a pure spirit God create anything as nasty as the physical? Because what gets sick? The physical, right? What decays? The physical. Does the spirit decay? Heck no, you don't see spirits decay. You see the physical. The physical is inferior to the spiritual. So no true spiritual God would create this physical universe. At best, it would be a lower level God. They called him the demiurge, that created matter. But that's not a God you worship. You get past that one and worship the God of spirit. It isn't all that dissimilar to what Hindus teach. And we talked about Hinduism and Buddhism. That there's this higher reality to which you aspire. And part of that aspiration is escaping this physical world. Yeah, here.
Well, God created Adam and Eve.
Mm-hmm.
For what purpose?
These folks would say that the stories in the Bible, that creator God, the one that said, let there be light, was the demiurge, was not the God. This was the lowest level of divinity. And Adam and Eve, yeah, they would say Adam. The purpose, but they're trapped. These good spirits are trapped in these physical bodies. That a lower God, not even a kind God, created them. And so now the goal is to escape the clay, the dirt in which that spirit was
They're
placed.
nuts or I'm nuts.
Well, that's what they're saying.
And I'll accept it.
Yeah, but that's what they're saying. When you look at Roman Catholic theology, priests don't marry. You want to aspire to be, being a nun is a higher calling because you don't have relationships. So some of this idea of that you are more spiritual when you deny the flesh, that's a sign of spirituality. We still see bits and pieces in Christianity, here and there. But that's what the Platonists are teaching, and I think that's what these guys are saying. There's a group in the Corinthian church, probably followers of who? Apollos, that are saying, these Greek philosophers are dead on. They're right. Man, you look at
Apollos wasn't an Egyptian.
Apollos, but the fact that but Platonism is powerful in Egypt too. In the Greco
What I'm
world.
trying to get at is that Paul, he's a nice Jewish boy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so he's going back to the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
The Old Testament,
Right.
the purpose between a man and a wife is to have children.
Exactly. And so what are the followers of Apollos doing? Paul cannot be right. Apollos is the one we should be listening to because Paul is talking about creating more babies. And babies ain't good.
Babies are a handful.
Yeah. In fact, these guys would say, the Old Testament, we've moved beyond the Old Testament. The Old Testament is the story of the deluge, the lesser God. We've moved beyond that. We are now in touch with the spiritual God, the God of knowledge, of wisdom. The gnosis. This is Gnostic ideas. We're transcending this. That's what this group is saying. Now, I don't think Apollos is teaching that. Because Paul says, if Apollos was teaching it, Paul would have said Apollos is a pile of, but he doesn't. So Apollos isn't teaching, but that's what some of the people are taking.
But I was going to say, they didn't really understand what he was saying.
Right.
As your example, then they would come to whatever conclusion fit
Absolutely.
their mindset.
And remember, what did he already say about the cross? Which is sort of this ultimate sign of the physical. Physically dying. God is a human being physically bleeding and dying on a cross. The Greeks are going to call that what? Foolishness. Of course they're going to call it foolishness. Because gods don't die. Gods transcend everything. They pull us up. They don't pull us down. You see what I'm saying? I'm not looking for God. I don't want anybody to convert to this idea. But that's what they're saying. And part of that is you got to keep away from the physical.
But did any of them have any proof that any of their gods did anything that they said they would do? No.
Well, the only way you know is to die. And nobody died and came back. Although Jesus, they will say, was the divine. Jesus wasn't flesh. Jesus was pure spirit that inhabited temporarily this physical shell. And in fact, Jesus didn't die. There's a difference between Jesus and Christ. Jesus, the person, died on the cross. But before he was nailed, the spiritual Son of God left the physical Jesus and watched the crucifixion from a hill. Why? Because God isn't physical. Your goal is to be religious. You don't get sick. That's an illusion. That's good Christian science. That's an illusion because it involves the physical. It doesn't involve the spiritual. This is what's being taught. Therefore, celibacy, even within marriage, particularly as it deals with sexuality, is a big deal for these Neoplatonists. Man, there are Acts. There's a wonderful story. Wasn't included in the Bible. Shouldn't have been. The Acts of Paul and Thelsa. Ancient writing. Goes back to the 3rd century. Paul and Thelsa. The whole story is this woman named Thelsa is engaged to a prince. And she has had a revelation that God does not want them to have any physical contact. But her fiancé wants to, get it on after the marriage. And what Paul does is so the prince locks her in a tower. And Paul scales the tower walls. She lets down her hair. No, she doesn't. But he scales the tower walls and comes in there and is giving comfort to Thelsa when her fiancé bursts in. And Paul witnesses to him and convinces him not to have any physical contact with him. And so they get married, but they live pure lives. I mean, that's kind of stories floating around, in the 2nd, 3rd century. So these guys, this is what some of them believe. Particularly the Greek Christians, The Jewish Christians didn't, but the Greek Christians did. And remember, Paul says, you don't need to become Jewish to be a Christian, And so you got people that were raised with this idea. The guys that go to the temple prostitutes believe something very similar, in fact. Only they come to a different conclusion. They say it doesn't matter what you do with the physical body. Because it doesn't count. You leave it behind. So there was a group called Epicureans. Indulgent. Eat, drink, and be merry. Go nuts. Because you know what? When you die, what do you leave behind? Garbage. You leave behind garbage. So abuse, doesn't matter. So these ideas are going around. That's why this connection between soul and body for the Jews doesn't make sense for the Greeks. Screws everything up. All right, so we've got this now a long time to get to that. It's important to know that's where he's coming from with this business about men and women not having any physical contact. Now, so Paul he's got to walk a very fine line. Because if he says you Greeks are just stupid, what has he done?
Told the truth.
Well, he told them, but what's going to happen to his church?
It's going
It's going to cease to exist, right? Because if he says, you got nothing going for you, this is dumb. Become Jews like me. Now we got another problem, right? Because that's what the Galatians are doing, and they're circumcising everybody inside. So it's a rough thing. So Paul has got this fine line that he wants, and he's got to go back and back and back to the foundation, right? And how does Paul respond? What is Paul's response to the Corinthians? This is an issue you're asking. They're asking him. And understand, they're not asking him a question. They're making a statement. It is well for a man not to touch a woman. They're not asking, should a man do that? No. They're making a statement. This is what we want. This is what we believe. How does Paul respond?
He's agreeing with them, but.
But, yeah. What does he say? How does he respond to this?
Well, it's better that a man marry than to give in to his natural desires in wrong ways.
Okay, right in the beginning, what does he say about husband and wife? And this is a fact. Remember, he talked about authority before. Fascinating thing about husband and wife. What does he say about it?
The husband must give his wife the sexual pleasure that she needs.
Okay, that a husband has a responsibility to the wife.
And the
Wife has a responsibility to the husband. Okay? Now, dealing with how does that relate to the statement? It is a man should not touch a woman. How does that relate to that statement?
outside of his marriage.
Well, remember, the question is inside of a marriage. Inside of a marriage, can a man say, it's better for me not to touch my wife? I am more spiritual.
If his wife agrees.
That's right. That there's a mutual responsibility between the two. A man has a responsibility to his wife. A wife has a responsibility to her husband. Now, if we wanted to blow that up into other areas, I think we could legitimately do that. But that's what he's saying. This is the basis for undermining that. Don't touch. You're better off if you don't touch a
He
woman.
also adds that you have to devote it to prayer.
Okay, now, because Paul is a plotter, right?
Yeah.
So if he just dropped that in and said, let's talk about the next issue. We might say, oh, okay. Men responsible, husbands responsible to wives, wives responsible to husbands. But Paul is anticipating the guy in the back of the class doing what? Paul, I got a question. Ooh, call me. I got a question. That's what he's anticipating. And so he's not going to just drop it there because he wants to broaden this argument. Okay? So, but that becomes the basis. There's a mutuality inside of this marriage, and it's focused on the sexual relationship. And he's going to carry that theme throughout this chapter. He's not talking about a lot of different things. He's talking about the same thing. At the beginning, talking about it at the end. Okay. Now, so we got a relationship between husband and wife. Now, somebody's going to ask, well, what does that mean about, authority? Doesn't a man have authority over his wife?
Yes, but
Well, what does he say? Because it uses that wonderful Greek word in verse 4, the Greek word gar. So he's building on what he said, because that's how the word is used. What does he say? Wife does not have authority over her body, but the husband does. And husbands are saying, "Ha, dog," although not these guys. These guys are saying, because they want to touch wives anyway. So nobody, is going to say, "Oh, yeah, tell it, Paul." Although men would do something like that. Woo, 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 would be whooping. But then he kind of pulls the rug a little bit, and he says what?
likewise.
Likewise. Yeah. Ooh.
But his wife does.
Mutual authority. Ooh, I don't like that. Boy, this is getting kind of tough. We're talking about authority. Same thing he kind of went to in the last chapter about who has authority. You're going to give the Romans complete authority over you? Probably not. You're going to give husbands complete authority over wives? Probably not. What about wives over husbands? Probably not. Because there's a mutuality, just like within the community. Okay. Now, how does he reinforce that? Because like I said, Paul's a plotter. He's not going to just drop this in without sort of reinforcing it. If there's a mutual authority, then
They belong to each other.
they belong to each other. Therefore, if they get together and have a meeting, call a meeting to order, and they discuss it, and they come to the agreement. What's the agreement they come to?
To abstain, to pray.
For a period of time.
Limited.
We're going to limited. That's right. We're going to go a limited, agree on a set amount of time. That they're not going to deprive one another, to devote themselves to prayer. Now, see, this I think is really powerful what Paul is saying. Because what the Greek Platonists are saying, Neoplatonists, is there's spiritual virtue in abstaining. There's physical virtue in not having physical contact. That makes you more spiritual because you're transcending the physical. But Paul moves us in another direction. He says, if you decide to do this, and he doesn't recommend it necessarily, if you decide to do this, limited time, because odds are what?
You'll yield to temptation.
One of y'all is going to get antsy. One of y'all is going to be antsy, and that's going to be a problem. And you're not respecting your mutual authority. But you only do that if you got another purpose. So if you sit down and say, well, we're not going to have physical contact. Gosh, a lot of married couples say that. But there needs to be a spiritual reason to do it. Not just, I find you disgusting now. Or if you take a shower every now and then. It's not that. You got to have a higher purpose. So there's no spiritual virtue in not having physical contact. Denying the flesh doesn't create a better spirit or more spiritual person. The growth in spirituality is what? The devotion to prayer. That's what's going to increase your spirituality, not deciding to take cold showers. That's not making you a better person. It's devoting yourself to prayer. Okay. So he's kind of laying this on, and why does it have to be temporary?
So
Because
Satan doesn't get a foothold.
Satan is tricky. Satan is tricky. And why is Satan tricky? What's the problem? If we sit down, not we, that's weird. But if a husband and wife sit down and make this decision, one may become kind of distracted, right? And Satan is a great distractor. One of them can become distracted and not be thinking about
Self-control.
prayer and self-control. When they say, let's pray together, and one of them is praying and the other one is let's get this over with. Yeah, that's exactly right. They don't want to be praying. Okay. Now, he's got to be real careful because, again, he's walking a fine line. What does he say about? Now, he's given this advice, right? Now, how does he soften that advice? Because he doesn't want to come in and say, write this down, this is what you got to do. This is just my advice. How does he soften what he says?
It's not a command.
This is not a command.
This is
This is not a command. Because again, somebody in the back of the room is saying, Paul, call on me, Paul. And Paul says, you. And the guy says, or the world says, I have no physical interest at all. And so Paul doesn't want to say, well, you've got half an hour more prayer. He doesn't want to do that because then people are going to be tied to this rule. I pretty much have to do it. If God has given you the gift, and he calls it a gift of what?
One kind and one of another.
Yeah.
Each has his own gift from God.
Yeah, everybody has their own gift from God. And some of y'all, let me phrase this gift. We talk about gift of preaching, right?
Right.
Gift of teaching, right? Gift of generosity. Well, what gift is he talking about here, Chris?
None of those.
Yeah, none of those. What is it? Now you're turning red. What is the gift? Yeah, and I didn't even mention circumcision. What is the gift? What's the gift of the hour?
Celibacy.
Yeah, that's so good. That sounds so good. Let's use celibacy from now on. Now, what I've got to ask you to do is I want you all to understand that he's talking about something less. No, less is wrong. More grounded than celibacy. Celibacy kind of has this Catholic priest sort of thing. He's talking about something else. If you are able to be celibate on every Saturday night forever. If God has given you that gift, and I'm not going to look for any kind of show of hands. If God has given you that gift, that's okay. But if you're married though, you've got a responsibility to your spouse, right? So if you go home and say, if a husband goes home or wife goes home and says, hot dog, darling, I have discovered a new gift. you got a problem, right? Yeah, that's right. I am glad to announce I have a new gift. I've been gifted. I'm in the gifted program. If you do that, what have you violated? Mutual authority, right? As authority, you're not being sensitive to your spouse. And that's why this idea of gift probably best applies to widows and single folk. That widows, if you all of a sudden find that is your spiritual gift, then maybe it's a good idea for you to
Get married.
No! Sandy, that's what happens too much. That happens all the time. If that is your spiritual gift, probably you want to date. You want to date. Short-term date. Yeah, short-term date. You don't want a group date. Like, no, that creates something else. You know what I'm talking about. Okay. Man, it's hot in here. All right. Now, understand, we got the focus here is sexuality. But this issue we can broaden now. One of the things we want to be careful with, I think, as we go through this whole chapter, we're going to fly through the rest of it because it's getting really uncomfortable.
He does say that.
What's that?
He does say that.
What's that?
That widows and single ladies, if they can't control
Yeah.
themselves, it's better to marry.
what I was saying is, if you have the gift
Oh, the
of not needing,
Oh, that's cool, yeah.
yeah, that is cool. Yeah, if you got,
If they kicked you, probably wouldn't want it.
yeah, that's exactly right. Whoo, boy. Yeah, and that is cool. You know, that would be nice. You know.
Choose not to respond.
Okay. See, because I knew I was going to do a slideshow. I thought better of it. You know, because I Googled Stormy Daniels, and it was a whole different thing, you know, and I didn't want to go there. All right. I got to take this collar off. All right. So, now, if you're a widow or widower, and then you're cool with this, stay cool. Stay cool. Okay, so we have... That's down a little bit. All right. So Paul is now. What does he? So he establishes. You know, he goes on a digression because he starts talking about after he's done this, and we kind of get his point, right? He immediately goes into what?
If you're married.
Well, I'm thinking of like verse 17.
Oh, jeez, we skipped up there. We really did skip. Yeah, we did.
Oh, being content.
I'm sorry, wait a minute, wait. Hold just a minute. All right, next, verse 10.
Verse 10.
Sorry, verse 10. I turned too many pages.
To the married.
Okay, we're in the marriage. But I really think he's talking about physical relationship. You know, because that's how he started. But Paul wants to cross T's and do all that kind of stuff. Now, in verse 10, what does he say?
Command more than a wife.
Now he's into this, because now what he's doing is, it's like he's got these bullet points under. He's established the general idea that there's a mutual authority between husband and wife. And there's a responsibility of physical relationship in that, unless there's a mutual agreement, right? So now he's gonna build on it and sort of deal with some exceptions. What does he talk about in verse 10?
Shouldn't separate from your wife, shouldn't separate from her husband.
Okay, wife shouldn't separate from her husband. Husband shouldn't separate from her wife. Now, for some reason, a lot of times we look at this and jump, well, now he's talking about divorce. He ain't talking about divorce. He's not talking about divorce. He's talking about the same thing he's been talking about, which is physical relationship. Therefore, why shouldn't a wife separate from a husband, husband separate from a wife?
Well, if it's mutual, they can.
If it's mutual, they abstain from that. But if they are separating from one another, then they are not able to respect and respond to the needs and wants of the other person. So it's not like they're in a trial separation. It's not talking about modern context. We're talking about the same context he's established. Therefore you need to be together, right? All right. Now, why would a wife, and he's talking to a church now, why might a husband and wife separate from one another for spiritual reasons? Why might a husband leave a wife for spiritual reasons? Or vice versa?
Difference in belief.
Difference in belief. Particularly, remember, we're talking about the context. What might motivate me to leave my wife? Spiritually.
You want children that she can't get you.
Or, I don't want children because I want to spiritually rise above this physical contact. And she is down and dirty. And I don't want to have anything to do with it. And so I am going to leave her so that I can what? So I can elevate myself so that I can become more spiritual. Right? And so that's what I'm doing. Now Paul says, clearly, even without looking at what he says, that violates what he just talked about, right? that husbands and wives have a mutual responsibility to one another, right? Okay. So that should never happen, right? All right. So husbands and wives, you got to stay together. You're not spiritually helping yourself or the other by separating. Okay? All right. Now, what does he say to the rest? Because that's if... What's that? What did you say, Joy?
I said somebody didn't get that memo.
Okay, didn't get the memo. Well, we'll cut it out and send it to you. All right. So we'll make sure he gets that little memo, right there, because we all know it was for spiritual reasons. Yeah. All right. So now this is what he says. If you are two believers, if you're two Christians, you need to. If God has brought you together, you should stay together. All right, somebody in the back of the room says, yeah, but what if, Paul, my spouse is a unbeliever? Do I need to hang with her or him? And Paul says, you're not listening. What did I just say? Right at the beginning of this chapter. Husbands don't have authority over their bodies themselves. Wives don't have authority over theirs. It is a shared authority. Well, but they don't believe that. Show me where I said it applies only to believers. So if you're a believer, do you have the right to say, I do not want to be joined to a foul pagan? Does a believer have the right to do that?
Doesn't appear that's
Doesn't appear to do that. Don't think you're spiritually approving yourself by dumping your Aphrodite worshiping wife, or wives your Aphrodite, or my uncle was a worshiper of Bacchus. Your Bacchus worshiping your husband. That's not what we're talking about. Because, and then Paul lays out, why should you stick together? For the sake of the children? No.
Because the believing husband makes the unbelieving wife holy and vice versa. And I would love to have you explain that.
Okay.
Next week.
I'll hold that thought.
Yeah, hold that thought. What does holy mean?
Set apart
Set apart
for God.
for God. Why might a believing husband make his wife holy? If they're in this mutuality. And that's for Paul, I think that's key. We're not talking about one side. We're talking about that they both agree on this mutuality of what Paul has already talked about. How would a believing husband set his wife apart? Make her holy?
By his example, she
Sure.
becomes a believer.
Well, by his example. If she accepts what Paul has taught, then she's what? She is set apart from this secular culture that she's around. He has set her apart because their relationship is unique. Yeah. Might even make her a believer. But even if he doesn't make her a believer, he set her apart. She's following values now that she didn't follow before. She is in a new and different relationship, which is set apart. Now, in that relationship, can things change? Well, of course they can. Can she become open to, because remember, belief is the work of the Spirit, not the work of the husband or the wife. Can she change? Well, of course she can. But at the very least, she's set apart from the culture in which she's in.
Okay.
And in fact, the only time he says that, the only time you can really separate, for Paul seeing it as valid, is when what?
The unbelieving partner makes that choice.
In other words, the unbelieving partner doesn't want to be,
In the relationship.
doesn't want to be
Set apart.
set apart. Doesn't want to be set apart.
Okay.
In other words, if you've got husband and wife, and the wife says, I don't want to leave my culture. I want to believe that abstaining is a way to reach God. If that's what she says, and I will not accept anything else, you're not setting her apart. She's there. You've been set apart. And so then what? The gap has widened. And it's by her choice. That she's rejected this mutuality that's part of this relationship. She's rejected marriage. She's rejected. She's not going to she's not going to join you apart from the culture in which she lives. She's not set apart. She's not home. But that's her choice. Now, it's not like a person I knew when I was years and years ago when I was in Norfolk. A woman came to me. She was the sister of a friend. Came to me and said that she was getting a biblical divorce. Now, you got to understand this woman. This woman was a wild child. A wild child. She already had one little boy. It's a little boy, and the middle name was Kennedy. Gave the boy the name Kennedy because she knew the father was on the USS Kennedy. That's about as close as you could get. He was certainly on the USS Kennedy. So that was she married, had a religious experience, married a nerd of a guy, a nothing of a guy, no backbone. She says, I'm getting a biblical divorce from this guy. And I said, what was the biblical divorce? And she says, adultery. Adultery. And I said, Phil committed adultery? And she said, no, I did. And so she could get a biblical divorce and then remarry because adultery was involved. That's not what Paul was talking about. That's not what he's talking about. Okay. So the bottom line is you need to stay what? You need to stay married. Okay. Now we got verse 17. Where he's been talking about physical stuff. And for some reason, I don't understand why he does it. I have a hard time with the logic. But it's got to be connected to what he's just said and what he will say later. He starts talking about what? Chris, your favorite topic? Circumcision. Yes. He starts talking about circumcision. And his point is, now what he's getting at is that I think.
Plastic surgery?
Yeah. I think what he's getting, I don't know. This thing about circumcision, I don't get. Because, that's what he said. Don't try to erase the marks of circumcision. I don't even know what you'd be doing.
Well, I thought while he was making that reference there, you can't undo what has been done.
Well, maybe that's.
You can't
Yes.
undo your relationship and you can't undo the circumcision.
Yeah, I would have picked another example, but Paul chooses that one. But he does.
That was one that they really.
Yeah, well, that was something, yeah. Now, the other ones make a little more sense because, again, he's talking about this physical relationship between husband and wife. Then he talks about, a slave, right? So if you're a slave, if you're a slave, be a slave. Now, I don't. This is not. You can't pull this out and say, this is what Paul's saying about slavery. He's not saying it about slavery. He's saying it about what? Marriage. So he compares marriage to slavery. Well, kind of. And if you're a slave, you be content being a slave. And even if you're free, which is kind of a different analogy than he'll use in Romans, even if you're free, you still kind of act like a slave. What's the point? What's the point? If you're married, what? Stay married. Be content staying married.
Well, the woman's being taken care of, she don't care whether you call her a slave. She's content with her life.
Yeah, boy. Thank you, Bob.
55 years from
now. Yeah, boy, that's gonna. There's something called called the love bank. You made a huge withdrawal right there. Okay, so if you're married, be content being married. I don't think he's going into anything deeper than that. Now, somebody in the back of the room is raising their hand. And, well, no, it's not Bob. He's not raising his hand. Right now, Bob's feeling pretty good, with what's going on. Because he's got another. Now, somebody's raising the hand, and it's really a pretty good question, right? What if I haven't had any relations at all? What if that's never been a part of my life? Should I remain that way? Is that going to spiritually help me? Now, what in what Paul has already written in this little thing, it would seem to indicate that the answer could be yes. If you've never been married before, that is no part of your life. Remember, he says you might want to abstain for a while to devote yourself to prayer, right? Widows have this gift. He has this gift. He doesn't seem to be interested. That's a good thing. Can devote more attention to God. When somebody raises a hand and says, well, what about me? I've never been married. Should I look to get married or not? Should I enter this kind of relationship, or should I remain as I am? Now, that's really that's a pretty good question, especially if you're talking to people who believe it is more spiritual to be single than it is to be married. And you could devote more attention to God without having to worry about dragging a husband or a wife along with you. I can guarantee you'll have more money to devote to the gospel. If you're not married, all of a sudden it opens up a lot of money and stuff, and time and attention. Okay. And Ken, how could you say that about Jean? That was a shock. Oh, I'm sorry. All right, so is it better? That's good. See, a little dissension is a good thing. Okay, is it better? So we're still talking about the same thing. That's why the circumcision deal and the slavery deal has got to be about marriage. Because why would he talk about marriage, then talk about something completely different, and then talk about marriage again? Because that's what he does. So somehow his idea of circumcision had to be involved in marriage. I don't know how, but Paul did. All right, so somebody in the back of the room says, what if you've never been married? What does Paul say to that young man or woman in the back of the room?
If you're not married, do not look for a wife.
Well, why? That's great. Why? Why if you're not married? Because Paul puts all of this in a context, tells us a little bit about how Paul sees the future. What's about to happen? What does he call what's about to happen? You're right, Hugh. He says,
So he's telling that things are difficult, a lot of turmoil.
The impending crisis. Something is going to happen, right? In light of what's about to happen. Now, this is a big deal. This is a continuing process, right? Doesn't he say that? In different translations, is it something like impending crisis, big event, And I'm looking at verse 26. What does your verse 26 say?
Present distress.
Present distress. Okay. What is he talking about? What is Paul talking about?
Persecution.
I don't think so. Could be, but I don't think so.
The return of Christ.
That's it. I think that is exactly what he's talking about. Jesus Christ, remember, we're talking about, Paul's writing this 15 years maybe after Jesus is gone. And we know in 1 Thessalonians, Paul believes Jesus is coming when? Anytime. Soon and very soon. This isn't Acts now, 60 years later. This is Paul 15, 20 years later. Within a generation. He thinks this is the present crisis, the impending peril. This is something that's going to happen right now. This is going to happen right now. Jesus is going to come back. Now, if this impending crisis, this peril that's right around the corner. What does he say about marriage? If you are single now,
Stay that way.
it's better to stay that way. Because there is absolutely no reason for you to get married and then have Jesus Christ show up the next day. Or at least, get married with this physical relationship, because it all comes back to the physical. There's no reason to do that. If Jesus is coming back, and when Jesus comes back, he's going to tell us later in Corinthians what's going to happen to us. We are going to be changed. The mortal puts on immortality, the perishable puts on the imperishable. There is absolutely no reason to get into this physical relationship of marriage if Jesus is going to be back anytime soon, in the next week. Could be any day. So if you don't have a spouse, maybe it's better not to get one now. But, because Paul always has these little buts and asterisks, what is the qualifier? Better not to have a spouse, because you're going to experience this terrible thing, this change, this cataclysmic change together. How does he qualify that? But,
You mean the reason to remain unmarried?
yeah, the reason to remain unmarried.
Because then one's attention can be given to the things of the Lord far better than if married and one has to be giving attention to the spouse.
And this is not the time to have divided attention. This is not the time to have divided attention. So, if you can do that, do it. Now, somebody in the back, so Paul is what? Covered people who are married. Started with the assumption, in marriage there's a mutuality. Husband belongs to wife, wife belongs to husband. There should be physical relationship unless both agree. One can't announce it themselves. Then he's answered, what about widows? When widowers, should they run out and get married?
It's a gift.
It's a gift. Some people have the gift. I had an uncle that had the gift. That was sort of self-imposed. But he talked about that, then did something about circumcision. And then he looked at married believers, non-believers. What did he say about that? Believers should stay within this relationship. If you've got a non-believer and you both agree to it, you are sort of set apart, stay. If the other person doesn't agree, and if you're both believers, you naturally would agree with what Paul wrote, right? So you stay together. Now he's talked about people who haven't been married at all, had no sexual experience. Given what's happening right now, maybe you should consider waiting and putting it on for a couple more years or so. What is the only group left that Paul really hasn't addressed? He's addressed married people, he's addressed widows and widowers, he's addressed people who are married connected to non-believers. He has talked about people who have never had any experience before. What is the only group left?
The engaged.
Those who are engaged, right? They are sort of in pre-marriage, right? And what does he say to those engaged? I love it. What does he say to those engaged?
The one, if you marry your betrothed, you do well, but if you don't, you're even better.
Why? If you don't, what would be the only reason you would say, I'm not going to get married?
Having your desire under control.
Which means you have the gift. Right? You have the gift. You are not burning with passion. If you are burning, on fire, means you don't have the gift. Right? And therefore you should. Your lips got really narrow. Your lips became pursed with that. Okay, you should be married, right? Because if you're burning with passion for anybody or for your fiancé, then what?
Get married.
Yeah, because You are not going to be spending a lot of time thinking about God, right? So you better get married when? As soon as possible. Quickly. Yes. I was listening to a musical called Grey Gardens. I watched the documentary. Have you ever seen the documentary Grey Gardens? It's worth watching. It's a fascinating documentary. They did a musical on it. And in one of the songs, the guy says, and I'm paraphrasing, when you get married, be chaste. If not, get married in haste. And that's kind of what he's saying here. You know, you either if you could stay chaste, that's fine. But if you can't, and when should you do it? Quickly, in haste. You should get married really, really quickly, because it does what? That's right, it keeps you. Now, somebody in the back says, last question. Well, what if, when am I going to be free from this mutuality? And Paul says that's easy. When she dies. When she dies. Or when he dies. And he uses that illustration in Romans too, about freedom in Christ. When your spouse dies, now you are kind of free. Here he says the same thing. So if you want to be free from this mutuality, this marriage mutuality, physical mutuality within marriage, the only way to do it is to kill your spouse. If you kill her or him, then you're free. No, but again, Paul is crossing all the T's, dotting all the I's. And he goes through all these possible relationships. The bottom line is what? And this is what and remember, they raised a statement. A man should not, it is better for a man not to touch a woman. That's more spiritual. What is Paul's answer to that? This whole chapter has been answering that statement. What does he say?
It depends.
It depends. That's what he says. It depends. But what he definitely says, though, is you become more spiritual by the other things you do, not by just avoiding physical contact. The avoiding of physical contact doesn't make you more spiritual unless you do something with the free time it opens up. The burning for lust, that time that it opens up, because you're not doing that anymore, you got to devote it to God. Just sitting around watching TV doesn't do it. Paul doesn't mention TV. Okay. Questions? Well, next week we're going to talk about homosexuality. No. We're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about another issue facing the church, and this one is just as physical, but maybe a little easier. And that's chapter 8, 1 through 9:23. Okay, so we're doing another. And if you come back, and please do, we'll deal with that. Let's have a word of prayer. Lord God, thank you for giving us this time together, and thank you for your word. Remind us, though, that as Paul deals with this ethic, he really does say sometimes there's a lot of stuff that goes into what we should be doing and what we shouldn't be doing. And help us to recognize that freedom in our own lives, but also help us to take seriously our responsibilities, particularly to one another. Guide and direct us and help us to respond. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen.
You've had enough today.